Hello and welcome to CFA Level 2 Review. My name is Jeff Chang. I am a CFA charter holder. I've been teaching CFA for almost 9 years now. I know what you're thinking. How old is this guy? I just turned 16. I'm just kidding. But I did use Schweizer when I took the CFA exam, so it's not like one of those Hair Club for Men commercials. I'm not just an instructor. I've also used the product. My hair is absolutely real. But enough about that. Let's talk about the CFA Level 2 curriculum. We're going to go over economics for valuation. I know you're super excited. If you're not and you're sad, don't worry about it, because there's an inverse relationship to your happiness factor and your probability of passing. So, in fact, if you don't see your family over these 6 months, or your girlfriend, boyfriend, dog, kids don't know your name, you're probably going to pass this exam. All right? So, but keep your eye on the prize. Why are we all here? Get our charter, make more money. That's what it's about. So, what we're going to do is let's jump into this stuff for economics. Now, economics, you can expect about 1 to 2 vignettes here. It's either going to be a currency one, growth theory, or regulation. If you happen to land on the currency exchange vignette, I would actually highly suggest that you save it for the end, because with currencies, it's so easy to kind of make unforced errors. You have maybe you flipped a particular currency somewhere, and basically what happens is you get in there. It's like the first couple vignettes. You start the currency vignette, you calculate down, 10 minutes go by, you're like, hey, I studied this, and you get down to the bottom, and you look on your paper, it's not one of the answers. And what's the next thing you do? You recalculate it. You go all the way down, you get to the next answer, and in fact, you actually find your mistake. You're like, oh, how could I be so stupid? And now you find your new answer, and you look over, it's still not one of the options. By this time, your bottom lip starts shaking, your tear rolls down your left cheek, and you stab yourself in the leg with your own pencil. Because why? 20 minutes have gone by, and you're on the third vignette. So what you want to do is kind of go through the vignettes that you are actually most comfortable with, get those points underneath your belt, and then go back to the ones that you could probably may take a little bit more time, because you definitely want to be very careful in these currency type questions. All right, let's get into this stuff. So what we're looking at here is foreign exchange quotations. So you can take a look here. We have the US dollar to Swiss franc quotes, shown three different ways. You can see it first way. It's written out for its bid-ask spread. You'll notice that it's US dollar over Swiss franc. The Swiss franc is what they call the base currency. And the US dollar in the numerator is called the price currency. Now, the other two ways they also can quote it, the ask, basically they just show the last essentially digits, whether through a forward slash or a hyphen. And as you jump down, you could take a look. Here is the bid price, and here's the ask price. And what does this mean? So in currencies, the way I like to think about it is you always have to lose in the case when you're dealing with the dealer. So one thing to always remember, if you are the loser, you're going to be a winner in this game. And what do I mean by this? So if I take a look at this particular quote, the US dollar to Swiss franc, you are going to give Swiss franc, and you're going to receive US dollar. Because in order to lose, look between the two numbers, if you're going to give Swiss franc and you're going to receive dollars, in order to lose, you're going to receive less. So when you compare the two numbers, which one is the smaller number? It is the 0.9521. Now, if you're going to give dollars, so in the ask price, you are going to give more, because you have to lose to get a particular Swiss franc. So at any point in time, if you're thinking about if I have one currency versus the next, you'll have to understand that between the two numbers, you're always going to receive less and give more, meaning you always have to lose. Always lose against the dealer. It's like a casino. So jumping down, you'll also notice the spread. If I take the difference between the two, this is basically what we call the spread, and in this case, it's 0.0015. They quote this as pips, or what they call 15 pips. Essentially, you multiply 0.0015 times 10,000, and it'll tell you pips. This is very similar to essentially basis points. what are some of the factors that affect this spread? So if you talk about the spread in the interbank market, the first one is the currency pair involved. So currencies that trade in larger volumes like US dollar to euro, let's say, for instance, are going to have tighter spreads. For currencies that may not be as popular, let's say Canadian dollar to Aussie dollar, it's going to have wider spreads to those. Secondly, the time of day window. Typically what we see is while the New York and London Stock Exchange, during those time frames when those exchanges are open, spreads are a little tighter. Market volatility, as the currencies that were, as they become more volatile, the dealers are going to require a higher compensation for the additional risks that they're taking on. This also segues into the size of the transaction. The larger the transaction, the dealer is going to basically charge more for taking on that larger transaction as they basically are looking for liquidity and may take on more risk if they have to take on the transaction. And the fourth one is your dealer-client relationship. So if we have a good relationship, you do a lot of business with me, I may give you a better spread associated with that. And the last one is forward spreads are positively correlated to maturity. Now what does this mean? Typically, longer dated maturities have wider spreads. The reason why is associated with the credit risk and interest rate risk further out the forward actually goes. Cross rates. So the exchange rate between two currencies implied by exchange rate with the common third currency. In this example, you'll notice is the US dollars. Between these two exchange rate, US dollar to British pound, Swiss franc to US dollar. Now, the question in a cross rate is, what is the pound versus the Swiss franc? Now, this is pretty much simple algebra, which we'll see. So if I just multiply the exchange rates by each other, you'll notice the US dollars cancel out. So between the two exchange rates, as I multiply them through, I get to 2.3182 Swiss franc per British pound. Now, if you want it the other direction, meaning you want to flip the price versus the base currency to British pound Swiss franc, you just take the reciprocal or 1 over that particular number. Now, keep in mind, if you look at your calculator, there's going to be a 1 over X button. That is your best friend when it comes to currencies, especially when you get into financial statement analysis, when you're working on multinational operations, temporal versus all current method. There's going to be a lot of exchange rates, and they may not give you that exchange rate in the way price versus base that you're actually looking for, so you're going to have to 1 over X all of them. Instead of typing in 1 divided by that particular number and adding an additional place where you can actually fat finger a mistake, just hit the 1 over X button and it'll just flip really quickly your exchange rate. Now, the triangle. Kind of this visual representation of this cross-currency, Swiss franc into British pound, you have to understand that there is a no arbitrage requirement, meaning if I'm converting from Swiss franc to British pound, there's two paths that I can essentially take. I can take the path number 1, which is the direct path, directly exchanging Swiss franc for British pound, meaning I'm giving Swiss franc and I'm getting British pound. Or I can take the long way around. The long way around. And what does this mean? Meaning I'm going to exchange Swiss franc for US dollar at the Swiss franc to US dollar exchange rate. And then, now that I have dollars, I'm going to take the dollars and then convert that to British pound. Essentially, I'm going to create a layover. Now, let's take a look at what this actually looks like. So you'll notice here is your direct flight. This is essentially path number 1, where you're going from Swiss franc to British pound. Now, your non-direct flight basically does what? This is path number 2, where you are exchanging first from Swiss franc to US dollar using 1.4860, then US dollar to British pound using 1.56. You'll notice both values have to equal because there is a no arbitrage requirement. Otherwise, if they don't equal, there is a arbitrage opportunity. Now, let's take a look. Cross rates with bid-ask quotes. Now we introduce bid-ask quotes, and remember what I said? You have to always lose. If you're the big loser, you're going to be the winner in this exam. All right, so we have our two bid-ask spreads here. Keep in mind, you always have to give more and receive less. All right, so what they're looking for is the Swiss franc and British pound cross bid-ask spreads. And essentially, the process is identical, but you have to get the bid and the ask correct. So let's take a look how this is done. Keep in mind, you can just take the reciprocal of the price versus base currency to get the other direction. Let's take a look. So between these two bid-ask spreads, let's say I was to give essentially British pound to receive US dollar. I'm giving British pound to receive US dollar. So if I'm going to give British pound, I'm going to give British pound, and I'm going to receive US dollar to start. Now, between these two bid-ask spreads, you're going to give pound and you're going to receive dollar. Now, keep in mind, dollar's in the numerator. Which one is the smaller value? Because you have to lose, you're going to receive less dollar. So you're going to choose what? The 1.35. As you can see there, that's the first value that I get. Now, once I give British pound, I receive dollar, I'm now holding dollars. Now I'm going to give dollars to receive Swiss franc. Now, if I'm going to give dollars and receive Swiss franc, which one am I going to choose? I'm going to choose the one that's going to give me less Swiss franc because I have to lose. This would be the 1.5. Notice that's the second value. When I multiply those through, what am I left with? So when I started this process, I gave British pound, I received dollars. In the second move, I basically gave dollars and I received Swiss franc. So, in this case, I'm giving British pound from the start, and I'm receiving Swiss franc to the end. This would essentially give me my bid. Now, if I go the other direction, I'm going to start with, I'm going to give Swiss franc and receive British dollar, so British pound. So, in this process, I'm going to start with Swiss franc to US dollar. So over here, I'm going to give Swiss franc. I'm going to receive US dollar first. Now, if you look at the Swiss franc to US dollar exchange rate, so I am giving Swiss franc, I'm receiving US dollar. Am I going to essentially give more or less? In order to lose, I have to give more Swiss franc because Swiss franc is what? In the numerator. So this is the value that I take. Notice that's the first value there. Now that I have US dollar, I am going to give away the US dollar that I have, and then I'm going to receive British pound. Now, if you take a look at the bid-ask quotes on the right side here, so I'm going to give US dollar, and I'm going to receive British pound. Which one's in the numerator? US dollar. So am I going to give more or am I going to give less? In order to lose, I'm going to give more, which is essentially the 1.3510. Notice that's the value right here. When I multiply it together, you'll see I get 2.0279. That means I started with giving Swiss franc and I received British pound. And then I take a look at my answers here, and I check them to make sure that I am correct. Is it, in this case, am I losing in this process? Because in the first one, if I give you British pound and I receive Swiss franc, I should be getting less. This is correct in this case. If I'm giving Swiss franc and I'm receiving British pound, then I essentially should give more Swiss franc for that £1, and that's also correct here. Notice that is the greater number, and I look pretty good. Now let's take a look at triangular currency arbitrage. All right? But how do you know whether the bid or the ask is the appropriate rate? Well, we talked about this. You always want to give more, and you always want to receive less. Now, if that doesn't work for you, there's also another way. In some cases, you can take a look at the bid means turning basically the denominator currency into the numerator. The ask means turning dollars into euros, or in this case, the numerator into the denominator. And how we talk about this is you up the bid to multiply, and down the ask you will divide. This is a trick as far as an additional trick to basically clearly see whether or not or what you would do with your bid or your ask. Now, let's start dealing with how do you deal with these arbitrage questions. All right, the arbitrage questions in this exam, the first thing you're going to need to do is verify the arbitrage. Is there an arbitrage that exists? You're going to need to know how to structure the trade, to exploit the opportunity, and keep in mind the direction is going to be key, and then you're going to have to calculate the profit given an initial investment that you put in. Now, keep in mind, there's only 3 options in this exam, A, B, or C. All right? And essentially, when you go through this, especially for the triangular arbitrage, if you go through, it doesn't matter where you go through the triangle. If it does not equal itself when you come around the triangle, guess what? There is an arbitrage profit. All right? Some way it's there. If that's the case, one of the options typically is going to be no arbitrage profit. That is going to be the wrong answer. Now, then you would then pick a particular leg of the triangle and then calculate the profit. All right? Let's take a look on how this is done. All right, given the following bid-ask quotes here, you can see Swiss franc to US dollar, British pound, Swiss franc to British pound. And what we're going to do is structure a profitable arbitrage trade. All right, these are the prices quoted out in the market. If you take a look here, recall that you're given the following bid-ask quote. This is what the market or the dealers are showing. Now, if the correct value is this, you'll notice that the British pound is overvalued. Keep in mind, this is the correct value. Notice what the bid-ask quote out there is greater than this value, 2.3 being essentially greater than 2.25, and 2.310 greater than 2.2531. The British pound is overvalued. In anything that you're looking at, anything that is overvalued, you always want to sell that. Okay? Anything that's undervalued, you would want to buy. So you're always going to want to give the British pound. So right now, you're going to give British pound. Now keep in mind, just as a reminder, take a look at this bid-ask quote here. You're going to basically sell the British pound. You're going to give the British pound. And when you give the British pound, you're going to receive Swiss franc. Are you going to receive more or are you going to receive less? Keep in mind, British pound's in the denominator. That's what you're going to give. And so you're going to receive less. So this is the number that you're going to essentially start with. Just keep that in mind. So when I start with British pound, notice here's my 2.3. I'm going to convert that over to Swiss franc, and I'm going to take the Swiss franc and convert that to US dollar. All right? Keep in mind, in this particular trade, what am I doing? I'm going to give Swiss franc, and I'm going to receive US dollar. So I am going to give more Swiss franc to get that one particular dollar. That's why to the bid-ask, you'll notice I'm taking the greater number. Now that I have US dollar, I'm going to give US dollar, and I'm going to receive British pound. Now, if I'm going to give US dollar, I'm going to essentially give more dollars and then receive 1 pound. So I'm going to take the greater number, and this basically gets me back to where I am. Okay? Let's take a look on how this works. So when I first convert the British pound, and I use the 2.3, now that I have Swiss franc, I convert the Swiss franc to US dollar. And once I have the US dollar, I convert it back to British pound. This basically will complete my triangular arbitrage. Let's take a look at spot versus forward markets. All right, the spot rates, exchange rates for immediate delivery. Forward rates basically are exchange rates for currency exchange on a specified future date. These are typically 30, 60, or 90 days. Both parties are obligated to complete the transactions at the future date. There's also a bid-ask spread, which is calculated just as for the spot rate. Essentially, typically, forward spreads are going to be greater than your spot spreads. Now, the difference between the forward and the spot rate is your forward discount or premium, often expressed as points, meaning essentially decimal times 10,000 typically. The forward discount, if something has a currency is at a discount, the forward value is actually less than the spot value. This creates negative points. The forward premium basically is when the forward value is greater than the spot value, and this creates positive points. Now let's take a look at a forward discount or premium example. So for the forward British pound discount or premium, we're looking for the discount or premium following the US dollar to British pound quote. So we have a spot rate of 1.8328, a 30-day forward priced at 1.8432. All right. So you'll notice that the forward is priced greater than the spot. Here is my forward. Here is my spot. And since the forward is greater than the spot, we have a premium. Just take the difference between the two. I get to a value of 0.0104. Now, if I multiply by 10,000, I get it in points, or what we call 104 points. All right. Note that 10,000 is used to quote currencies in 4 decimal places. For instance, a Japanese to US quote would only be 2 decimal places, and we'd only multiply it by 100 to get the points. Now let's take a look at mark-to-market value of a forward. After inception of a forward, the contract is valued assuming an offsetting position is taken by the trader. You can see the formula here. The first thing we're going to look at of this formula is the contract size. This will be in the units of the long currency. Now, this is solving for the value in terms of the price currency. And this is the forward price at time t in which you're actually valuing. It's the moment you're actually valuing the particular forward. This is the interest rate of the price currency. Keep in mind, just as a reminder, this is the interest rate of the numerator. Okay? This is the interest rate of the numerator. If you forget on test day, keep in mind the interest rate at the bottom is going to be the numerator interest rate. And then the number of days to maturity, meaning how much time is left on the particular forward. Let's take a look at an example. So here's a problem. The trader, in this case, is long New Zealand dollar. Before we go any further, let's think about what that means. If you're long New Zealand dollar, that means you're buying New Zealand dollar. So let's just write that down for us. If you're buying New Zealand dollar, you are going to receive New Zealand dollar. Basically, at the maturity of the forward, you're going to receive New Zealand dollar, and you're going to give US dollar. This is the forward contract you're entering into. I always like, as far as getting into these types of currencies, is to write this out so it's very clear to say what's happening here. I'm long New Zealand dollar, so whenever you're long something, you're buying it, right? So you're going to receive New Zealand dollar, you're going to give US dollar. So in this case, I take a look at the bid-ask spread. Remember, you got to lose. You got to be a big loser in this case. So I'm going to receive New Zealand dollar. I'm going to give US dollar. Keep in mind, US dollar is in the numerator. So I'm going to give US dollar. I'm going to give more, because giving more and receiving less is the losing position. So which one of these two numbers is going to be the greater one? So in this case, you'll notice I'm going to give more. It would be the 0.08438. That is essentially the forward price in which I enter into this particular forward. Okay? 1 month later, the foreign exchange quotes, basically the interest rates are as follows. You can see down here. Remember what I said in the last slide. which interest rate do you put in the denominator? It's the currency in the numerator. So, by the way, which currency is in the numerator? US dollar. So I'm looking for definitely an interest rate somewhere here in the US dollar section. Okay? So if 1 month has passed and I am in a 3-month forward, 1 month has passed and I'm in a 3-month forward, how many more months are left? 2 more months. So the interest rate I'm really looking for is the 0.11%. All right? Let's take kind of an illustration of how this works, because I always like to kind of have pictures to visualize what's going on. Let's say this is me. Okay? And I enter into this forward. Now, essentially, this forward is going to be 3 months. Now, remember what's happening at maturity. I'm going to give US dollar. And for New Zealand dollar, I'm going to receive that because I'm long this forward, so I'm going to give US dollar, receive New Zealand dollar. All right? Keep in mind, I'm going to give more. Now, if I'm going to give more, remember what value that was? If you take a look on your previous slide, it was 0.8438 because I'm going to give more US dollar to New Zealand dollar. All right, we'll pause right there. This is basically what? This is the transaction I'm getting into. I'm getting in a forward contract 90 days from now, essentially 3 months from now, and I'm going to give more US dollar and I'm going to receive New Zealand dollar. Now, 1 month goes by, and now I'm standing here. There's 2 months left on this forward. So that means that I'm looking for the 2-month forward. Okay, so this is the contract that I currently have. I want to unwind this contract. So if I'm in a contract to receive New Zealand dollars, I need to get a contract that goes the opposite direction. I need to give New Zealand dollars, and I essentially need to receive US dollars. Okay? So let's take a look. If you look on the previous slide, I have 2 quotes. 0.8433 or 0.8435 dollar, US dollar to New Zealand dollar. So I'm going to receive less and give more, right? So in this particular quote, I'm going to receive less, so I'm going to take the smaller number. What is the smaller number? 0.8433. This is the smaller number. Keep in mind, this is FP at time t. This is the forward price when I entered into this contract. Now I have basically the first 2 parts of my equation, 0.8433 minus 0.8438. There is my first 2 parts of my particular equation. Now keep in mind, this is 1 million, the contract size is 1 million New Zealand dollars. Okay? And we know this is discounted using the numerator currency, but the thing is that let's just kind of really just think about this. The forward contract that we went into is to what? Receive New Zealand dollars and give US dollars. If you're going to give US dollars, let me ask you, what do you have in your pocket right now? That means that if you're going to give US dollars, you must be holding US dollars. And if you're holding US dollars, essentially you're going to have the interest rate, use the interest rate of US dollars to discount it back to where you're standing. So I'm going to use the US dollar 2-month interest rate. Right? And in our example, we're looking at the 60-day. You'll notice the interest rate is 0.0011, 60 over 360, 1 plus that value. There is my complete formula. So let's think about this concept first. right? I entered in the forward, went to an offsetting position, and discounted it back using the numerator currency's interest rate. Because why? Because when you entered into the forward contract, you are entering in a contract to give that numerator currency, and that's why you're essentially discounting, because you have that particular currency in your pocket. All right? Let's take a look on the next slide here. And now you can see if you multiply out the equation, you get to negative $499.92. Now, let's talk about covered interest rate parity. All right? In covered interest rate parity, and what does the covered mean? Please write for me. Covered means bound by arbitrage. This is basically what the covered means. Covered interest rate means bound by arbitrage. And essentially, the change in exchange rate will just offset differences in interest rates. So the currency with the higher nominal interest rate will depreciate, is point number one. And point number two, when covered interest rate parity holds, an investor will make the same return holding either currency. Because the idea is, if you're trying to take advantage of the higher interest rate, that additional return that you're going to make essentially will be offset by the depreciation of that currency. So, for instance, if the US dollar had an interest rate was 8%, the euro rate was 6%, everybody would be like, hey, I want the 8% interest rate. Now, according to arbitrage, the US dollar would depreciate approximately 2% relative to the euro if covered interest rate parity holds. Otherwise, everybody will invest in the 8% interest rate. Now, the formal covered interest rate parity relationship, notice if this higher interest rate at the top versus a lower interest rate at the bottom, the numerator then becomes higher. When the numerator becomes higher, essentially that means that particular currency is depreciating, because now you're going to have to pay more. Remember, the numerator is going to have to pay more to get the denominator currency. So the higher interest rate basically says that will be offset by the depreciating currency. Now, this, when we say covered interest arbitrage, keep in mind covered means bound by arbitrage. Let's take a look at a particular problem here. So we have a 90-day interest rate in Canadian dollars. We have the same 90-day interest rate in Swiss franc at 5.5%. So if I'm just looking at this particular problem, I would assume that the Canadian dollar would be depreciating. Now, the current spot rate for the Canadian Swiss franc is 0.7901, and the 90-day forward is 0.81. All right? Now, what are the things I'm going to need to do? First thing, I need to calculate the correct 90-day forward rate, describe the correct arbitrage trade, and then calculate the arbitrage profit based on an initial Swiss franc value of 1 million Swiss franc. All right? So the first thing we're going to do is calculate the arbitrage-free forward rate. So what we have here is a spot rate of 0.7901. Keep in mind this is quoted as Canadian over Swiss franc. So Canadian dollars in the numerator, I'm going to use the Canadian interest rate. Swiss francs in the denominator, so I'm going to use the Swiss interest rate. So these are 90-day rates. As I multiply through, I get 0.7916. Keep in mind, this represents the correct price. And we saw on the previous slide that the quote was 0.81. So what do we have here? So there is a mispricing, and if we take a look on the next slide here, that the 0.81 is greater than the correct price of 0.7916. Think about this. The Swiss franc is overpriced in the forward market, meaning if you give Swiss franc, you should be only getting 0.7916. In this case, the current market is quoting what? You give a Swiss franc, you're going to get 0.81, but the correct price, you should be only getting what? 0.7916. So, what are you going to do? Your Swiss franc is overpriced. What do you do with overpriced things? You always sell things that are overpriced. Always buy low, sell high. So, in this case, you should do what? You should execute the 0.81 transaction and essentially sell the Swiss franc at that 0.81 price. You sell the Swiss franc, get 0.81 Canadian dollars. Let's take a look at how this example works, and let's take a look at it from a visual standpoint here. So, first off, I know that I want to sell the Swiss franc at this price. So the Swiss franc, I'm going to give that because that's the overpriced currency, and I'm going to receive Canadian dollars. This is the price, this is the mispricing. So I'm going to give your Swiss franc, I'm going to get 0.81 Canadian dollars. All right? Now, over this 90-day period of this particular forward, I know this is the transaction I'm going to enter into. Now, think about this transaction. I'm going to give Swiss franc. So if I'm going to give Swiss franc, I need to have Swiss franc, right? So I need Swiss franc at maturity. That means I should lend Swiss franc, so I get a payoff, meaning I get paid in Swiss franc when essentially the loan matures. So I'm going to lend Swiss franc over this period of time, and at the end of the period I'll have Swiss franc, then I can deliver against the contract. So, however, right now I need Swiss franc to lend, right? So if I need Swiss franc to lend, I need to buy Swiss franc in the spot. So, in order to buy Swiss franc, I need to sell Canadian dollars to get Swiss franc. The problem is I also don't have Canadian dollars. So I'm going to borrow Canadian dollars to make this trade occur. So notice how this whole thing is working here. If I move backwards, notice I'm first starting with what I'm trying to take advantage of, and I work backwards through it. I'm going to borrow Canadian dollars so I can get Swiss franc, and then I'm going to lend that Swiss franc so I have Swiss franc to deliver against the forward. By the way, this Canadian dollars I'm borrowing, and I'm going to have to pay essentially interest, and this will, after I convert, because keep in mind I'm going to receive Canadian dollars here, I'm going to use this to pay the loan. All right, this is kind of the visual process of how this whole arbitrage, covered interest rate arbitrage works. Let's take a look at this as far as an example with the numbers that we've seen in this question here. In this case, you'll see in step 1, you sell the Swiss franc forward versus the Canadian dollars, and you buy the Swiss franc at spot versus Canadian dollars. You borrow the Canadian dollars for 90 days. That's what we saw at the top, and you lend the Swiss franc for 90 days. And then you use the loan proceeds, Swiss franc, to deliver against the forward contract, and the proceeds from the forward transactions to repay the loan. Let's take a look at how this looks with the numbers. So if I kind of look at how this works here. So the first thing in this question, they tell me I start with 1 million Swiss francs. I know from the previous picture that I essentially need to lend this. And when I lend at the Swiss franc at their interest rate, I'm going to make 1,013,700 750 Swiss franc. Why do I need the Swiss franc here? Because I'm going to give the Swiss franc and receive Canadian dollar. When I convert that at the forward price of 0.81, I get 821,138 Canadian dollars. Now the question then becomes is, where did you get this money? Well, you got it from what? Borrowing Canadian dollars, borrowing 790 Canadian dollars. And how did I get that? From the spot rate conversion. I borrowed Canadian dollars. So pause right there. Think about what's happening right now. So what I actually first do, while the question says, hey, we're going to do $1 million Swiss franc transaction, the first thing, as far as from a realistic standpoint, I'm going to borrow 790,100 Canadian dollars, and I'm going to convert that to $1 million Swiss franc. I'm going to lend that and going to make 1,013,750 Swiss franc. I'm going to convert that back to Canadian dollars. Now, since I borrowed Canadian dollars, this means that what? That I have to pay interest on that, and that's going to essentially appreciate to 802,445. Okay? So I got Canadian dollars from the forward. I'm going to need that to pay off the loan. You'll notice there's still money left over. This is the arbitrage profit. And if I take the difference between the two numbers, what do I end up with? $8,693 is what's left over after I pay the loan. So this is what you see here. Your cash flows associated with the covered interest rate arbitrage. You'll notice I started with my 1 million Swiss franc. Remember, this is starting at the bottom left-hand corner. Remember the 1 million. Then it goes up to 790,100 Canadian dollars. Now remember, you're lending this, right? And when you lend this, you get 1,013,750. That's what you see here. This converts using your forward rate. You'll notice that equals to your 821,138. This comes over at 802,445. I'm a big fan of drawing pictures, especially when you're talking about a covered interest rate arbitrage problem. So if you notice on the next page here, there's your 821,138, and then there is your arbitrage profit. So if you want to kind of, while you do this question, remember what I said about kind of saving these questions to the end, because there's a lot of moving parts associated with it.